Hi, I'm Anna Swee. I'm a fashion designer. I think the biggest shift in what happened with my career was when I did my first fashion show. I had gone to Paris with my friend Stephen Meisel, and on the way to our first fashion show, we stopped at the Ritz and picked up Madonna. Um, I hadn't met her before, and she didn't really know me, but by the time we got to the Jean Paul Gaultier show, she leaned over and she said, Anna, I have a surprise for you. I'm wearing your dress. And that was one of the things that gave me the confidence that maybe I could do a fashion show. So the first show was in the beginning of when New York Fashion Week started becoming international. So many buyers from all over the world, so much press from all over the world were coming to see not just the fashion designers, but all the supermodels. And I was lucky enough to have friends that were supermodels. So Linda and Naomi and Christy helped me to get all the top models of the time. The industry has changed a lot. In fact, I think that when I started it, the industry seemed much smaller. Everyone kind of knew each other. We all kind of shared the models, shared the venues, and little by little, as more and more people started showing in New York, things got more crowded, much more competitive. A lot of the Europeans started coming here to show, and it just got much more, well, almost cutthroat. I wish that it would go back to how it was, and maybe the epidemic now is going to like calm things down, slow things down, and bring about a change. And I think that it will probably eliminate a lot of the extra shows that have been going on, and maybe once we start doing shows again, maybe it will be much more condensed and like it was in the old days. My advice to people that want to become fashion designers now is go to a very good design school. There are many excellent schools internationally, and in the United States, I think number one is always Parsons School of Design. Kent State is great, Savannah is great. So I think that you have a lot of selection, and the most important thing though is it's a very, very competitive field. I think you have to really be certain that this is what you want, because you have to go to 3 to 4 long years of schooling, and then you really have to learn your craft by starting out probably in an assistant position and really learning how to design, how to work with a company, how to make select materials, resource. All those things are so important to learn. And resourcing has changed. When I started, everything was available in the United States. Everything was represented here. It was easy to get fabrics and trims and all the findings that you needed. More and more as things got offshored, it's become more and more difficult to source. The quantities had to become bigger because you had to source them from overseas. You had to place bigger orders, where in the past, people stocked things and you would be able to buy what you needed. So I think it's a much different time. Plus, most of the manufacturing has shifted to Asia and South Asia. And I think that right now, if I were starting, I would probably move to China to become a designer there, because that's really where all the industry is. That's really where most of the clothes are made. And the technology there is much more advanced than it ever was here in the United States. When I went to Parsons School of Design, I met my best friend, Stephen Meisel. He was in illustration, and we actually met in the lunchroom, and we started hanging out at lunch, and then he asked me to go out to clubs with him, and so we had like this gang of people that we would go out dancing as much as we could. Not every night, but as much as we could. When I was a kid, I read an article about two young ladies that went to Parsons School of Design, and when they graduated, Elizabeth Taylor opened a boutique for them in Paris. Well, I didn't really realize that one of the young ladies' stepfather was the legendary fashion photographer Irving Penn, and her mom was a top fashion model in the 50s. So as a kid, you don't get those kind of connections. You just think that, oh, the magic key is to go to Parsons. Well, actually for me, Parsons was my magic key too, because I met Stephen, who was photographing or inventing all those top supermodels in the early 90s, and that's how I knew them, because I knew them socially before I ever really worked with them. So I think that gives you an example of connections that really really help in a career. And also, when I was working for bigger companies, my bosses let me sit in on meeting with buyers, meeting with press, and I really met a lot of those people when I was still working for other big companies. But once I started doing fashion shows, again, because New York was central and kind of the most exciting place for fashion shows in the 90s, I really met all the top press people and all the top fashion editors, and it was really kind of there was much more of an infrastructure, much more of a camaraderie where people were supporting each other, and there was really like kind of a whole system that was supporting each other. I think my designs stood out in the 90s because there was really a seismic change going on. In the 80s, everything was power dressing. People were head to toe designer like Chanel or Gianni Versace. And suddenly in the beginning of the 90s, because I had these friends that were supermodels, I would see them almost a couple times a week. I would see what they were wearing. And suddenly, instead of wearing head to toe designer, they were buying vintage. They were asking me to take them to the flea market, or where could they buy like a vintage prom dress. And they were changing the way they were looking. It was much more individualistic. It was kind of more dressing down. People were wearing jeans with vintage lingerie tops. There was a model that was doing chokers for everyone. So I think people were taking on a kind of more of that hippie sort of look rather than this dressed up kind of city look that the 80s represented. And I realized that maybe there was a time for me to really show my fashion because this is what I was all about and what I always really loved. The fashion world is very competitive now because it's international. So you have designers from all over the world that are vying for all the same few jobs that there are. You know, you have many great design schools in Europe. I think that London has Central St. Martin's, which is excellent, and many of the top designers came from Central St. Martin's. And you have schools in Italy, there are schools in France, Japan, and of course the United States. So I think that there's a lot of competition and many less jobs than there were. So I think that that's why I say you have to really be certain that you want to be a fashion designer, that you really want to stick with a career that is very time consuming, that really makes you have to make a lot of sacrifices to really focus on your career. And those are all key words, is focus and determination and really knowing that this is what you want to do. When I read the article on the two young ladies that went to Parsons School of Design, and I realized that my babysitter had 17 magazine, and in the back there was always ads for Parsons School of Design. So I asked my mom to buy me a copy of 17, and in the back was the address where you write for the registration catalog, and that's what I did. And I really geared my whole education so that I could have the proper portfolio for Parsons. Back then they required a 3.6 average, grade point average or higher. Also, you had to do a self-portrait, and of course you had to do some fashion sketches. I think it's a little different now. It's probably more digital, and I think that really if you want to become a design student, you should look into what the requirements are for design schools and make sure that you have those classes. I knew how to sew and make clothes already because I learned how in home ec, and I was making all my own clothes since junior high school. And that helped a lot, knowing construction, but not every designer really knows how to make clothes. They know how to kind of style it, but they don't really put it together themselves. But I've always known how clothes were put together, and I was always fascinated by what you could do with fabrics. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish everyone lots of luck and really, really the best in pursuing your career as a fashion designer. Just remember my words. It takes determination and lots of hard work, and really, really a focus on this is what you want to do with your life. So good luck to everyone. Thank you.